Hey friends, in today's video, I'm going to talk about PvP and power creep in Destiny 2 and try to ask and humor the question, is PvP doomed if more powerful, low-risk, high-reward items are introduced into the sandbox? The sandbox meaning how weapons and exotic armor and abilities, game modes, maps all interact with each other, how we approach the game. So power creep is when newer, more powerful items are added to the game to entice players to participate. Over time, the relative power scaling of items rise. So we have the Allegro hand cannon, Shattered Piece is more powerful than that, Waking Vigil, more powerful than that, and Palindrome, the most powerful of all. So if you look at the stats, Allegro has 42 range, Shattered Piece 51, Waking Vigil 55, and Palindrome with a whopping 75. And when you think about the comparable perks and how you build the overall loadout, Palindrome's superior in almost every single way. But if we're talking side grades or very specific loadouts, let's talk about side grades. An item that is almost as powerful, but for a different reason or purpose. So an example is Cantata is Arc and offers unflinching benefits. Palindrome is Void and offers high base stats. If you're comparing Palindrome to Waking Vigil has a perk called Disruption Break, which can help with team shotting. But in the majority of cases, you're better off just using a Palindrome, which is why I say it power creeps the Waking Vigil, but it's close enough with Cantata that I say Cantata is a side grade. So when they keep power creeping and keep side grading, what we get is bloat. So new items are added, and devs have to test interactions with those old items and the new items. So the more things that are added, the longer and potentially more difficult the process becomes. For those who have played the Binding of Isaac, think of every expansion pack that adds items and think about every interaction and how devs have to test for that sort of thing to see if they work. I put some random icons on screen now because I don't know if all of these interact. Do feedback fence work with a glaive? Does knockout activate on a glaive? What about the blinding special weapon? Is it on the melee swipe or just the projectile? What about a melee kill gives super energy on your helmet? How does that interact with all these? Does the ACD feedback fence count as a melee kill if you activate the arc part of it when you get damaged? Like, what are the answers here? How should they work? And the devs have to consider this with every new addition to the game, which can lead us to what we call a tier 0 format and degenerate strategies, which, by the way, is not an insult. The term comes from competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! And each tier is top spot tournament representation. So tier 0 is when 65% of the top spot players exist. Tier 1, 15 to 65%, and tier 2, 5 to 15%, and so on. Tier 0 meta is typically caused from oversights in the developer test process, aka I just talked about bloat, so you can kind of see how they're interconnected. Exploiting these oversights is known as a degenerate strategy, and you can see I put some Destiny examples here. We have Khepri Sting and Lorentz Driver. That's been a very popular one lately. Recently got nerfed, so maybe not as popular. Telesto was crazy last weekend. That was definitely tier 0. However, I'm going to give you the Yu-Gi-Oh! Example, just to oversimplify it. You can special summon this card. It makes everything on the field go away, makes the opponent throw away their hand. And then if you get this other card down called Yatagarasu and attack with it, then your opponent's not allowed to draw a card the next turn. So you essentially lock them out of playing the game. So we have some stats courtesy of Trials Report, and it shows one weekend of trials where Void Hunter, Void Titan, and Arc Titan had very, very strong representation with Khepri's Sting, Sidearms, and Linear Fusions. It's obviously a tier 1 meta, but when we consider the whole team makeup and people swapping stuff and maybe not getting the kill with the weapon that's doing the most work, I think like you Lemon Arc, headshot them, but you clean up with the sidearm. The sidearm gets the representation more, not necessarily the Lemon Arc. So when you consider swappables, do they start with Peregrine Greaves or do they start with Dunes? You might be able to argue that we're in a tier 0 meta. I'll explain some tier 0 metas in the past when we talk about degenerate strategy, which again is not an insult. If anything, take it as a compliment for playing so optimally. A degenerate strategy can often make the game state boring. Despite this, the strat can be so effective that without both players using it, one might as well just concede. which is how and why a tier 0 meta comes to exist. So some examples include third-person hilting with the sword in Destiny 2. There used to be a point where in competitive matches, this was used 100% of the time. There were other eras where playing on Stadia, for example, it was just Chaos Reach majority of the time, definitely over 65%. And then the most recently was Omnioculus with Lord of Wolves, where if somebody was using Omni, you essentially needed Lord of Wolves to kill him. And if you're already using Lord of Wolves, you might as well also use Omni. And then it creates this boring game state where typically the first person to shoot loses. So you're playing a first-person shooter game where you're not rewarded for shooting your opponent. You're punished. It's very, very strange how this one comes to be. So ultimately, this creates a problem. When we talk about power creep, bloat, tier 0 metas, and degenerate strategies. So how does Bungie motivate players to grind new loot while simultaneously keeping power creep in check? Can Bungie realistically test most interactions with every new addition? And can they keep this up indefinitely? Because every expansion, everything has to be tested against each other. The Destiny Content Vault keeps the game file size small. Should Bungie make all old items permanently accessible? Can a healthy skill gap and accessible skill floor be maintained? Can balance oversights be remedied faster than new ones are found or created? I'm looking at you, Classy Restoration. So here are the current solutions offered by Bungie and the ones that might be realistic. I'm not saying they're great, but they're here. We have sunsetting and gear depreciation. There are multiple generations of weapons. Like Eye of Soul Sniper Rifle has like 3 different generations of it with different perks. And so one of them might be sunset, one might have a new perk generation, and one might have the new perk generation and an origin trait. There's also fear of missing out, aka FOMO, and loot rotations. So for example with FOMO, in Iron Banner, the shotgun and the pulse rifle are going away, and they will return, but we just don't know when. So that's fear of missing out. It makes you want to play Iron Banner in case you want a shotgun or in case the pulse rifle ends up being good in the future. And then there's also loot rotations like Dares of Eternity. Every week the loot pool is different and it's on a 3-week cycle. Also the Umbral engram system. We have, for example, a Suros engram in the helm or a Beist engram. And maybe they're going to add more of those in the future. They did talk about some sort of FOMO engram system, a legacy engram system, and I'm curious as to what that is. They could just continue on and not do anything and power creep till Destiny 3. I'll talk about why that might not be a good idea soon. And then, of course, there's hotfixes, patches, and new systems. Like it or hate it, Airborne Effectiveness created an option to grind for high AE gear. Not saying it's a good system, but the new system definitely caused a reason to go get new things. So how do other games handle this problem? Well, there's the economy system like Counter-Strike uses. Each player is allotted money to purchase their loadout. The more powerful something is, the more it costs. Earn money by winning rounds or doing whatever the game requires of you. A power limit is kind of like economy. And there's a lot of different games that employ this. It's an arbitrary power limit, so the more powerful an item is, the more it costs in a loadout. If you go over the limit, you're not allowed to queue. So think the Call of Duty Pick 10 system or even the Destiny Armor 3.0 system, just selecting perks within your armor and having to fit it within 10 energy. There's also the ban list, which is in Yu-Gi-Oh! There are cards that are limited, semi-limited, and banned in competitive play. Opposing this is the rotating format which Magic the Gathering uses. So new cards cycle in, old cards cycle out at regular seasonal intervals. And then of course we have pick ban in League of Legends where each team takes turns picking and banning a champion. To give you an example of economy, this is Shadowrun, a game from 2007. It's the predecessor of Valorant, so Valorant before Valorant existed. It's CSGO, but you take space magic and that sort of thing, combine it all together. Almost kind of like Destiny, which is why I put it here. So you purchase your weapons, grenades, magic, and equipment, and of course, the more powerful something is, the more it costs. A power limit, I'm going to show you an example from Yu-Gi-Oh! Duels to the Roses, because this is one of the best power limits I remember. If you want to duel somebody, you have to be at or below their deck cost, or their power limit. So in this case, Taya is a 933. And so to get my deck below 933, I might have to use weaker monsters. Like this Barrel Dragon, for example, costs 53. Right now the deck cost says I'm at 918. So if I want to use powerful cards, deck cost goes up, then I cannot fight Taya. Or I can replace some powerful cards with some weaker cards, then I'm allowed to duel. So that's the idea. So if Destiny used the economy or deck cost option, each playlist would have a respective budget or a power limit. So to queue control, maybe I have to keep it under 2,500. Maybe Iron Banner has no limit. Maybe the survival/competitive playlist is a very low limit of 1,000. Or it match makes based on the limit that you're at or the total that you're at. So let's say that I queue control with a 7,700 power limit. Well, it's going to try to match me as close to other 7,700s within my skill bracket. And if it can't find them, it'll change some variables around. So that's another option. So each weapon, armor perk, subclass node, aspect, fragment, etc., these would all have a cost associated with them. So I just gave you an example of what a really, really strong borderline degenerate loadout looks like on a power limit system. So this would be 2850 with the Lorentz driver and Antaeus words. But as soon as I dumb some of it down and take like a green rocket launcher, a blue shotgun, a less popular subclass, a less strong exotic, my power limit is below 1,000, so I would be able to queue the competitive playlist in this make-believe system. And I think this make-believe system is very, very good example for the whole big point of this video. So then this shows what the subclass system might look like. Then it shows the pick 10 system and the armor. Didn't really have to change this. Anyway, I hope that illustrates and starts getting your head rolling with ideas here. Yu-Gi-Oh! Ban list. Trading card game. The Forbidden and Limited list keeps problematic cards out of the main format. Sometimes cards are errataed. That's just a fancy way of saying they're re-released with a nerfed version. And this is how people play Yu-Gi-Oh! If the card is on the banned list, you can't use it. Or if it's limited and you can only use 1 or 2 copies, you have to change your deck to fit that before you're allowed to compete. And so Destiny could also employ this. Another example was Custom Robo from 2007. A illegal part would have an exclamation point on it to say, this is so much better than other options that it's unfair to your opponent. I'll let you read that on your own if you want. That's funny. So if Destiny had a ban list, maybe something like Lorentz Driver or Lemon Arc would have like an exclamation point on it that says, if you use this, you just cannot queue the competitive playlist. Moving on, let's talk about the rotating format, aka sunsetting. This is how Magic the Gathering does it. So each season, a new card set is the new competitive standard, and old sets are unusable. This is the Dominaria United set. I don't really know much about Magic, but here it is. So what if Destiny took this approach? What if they went full sunsetting, or a compromise like I'm showing you right here? Each season, Shaxx would cycle in only gear that's allowed in the competitive playlist. And obviously it'd be more than these 8 weapons. It could be like 30 to 100, have armor and everything. A very, very simple mod structure even. Maybe a limit on the pick 10 system. Things like that. Maybe there's no exotics whatsoever. It's really up to Bungie, and they could change this each season. And even within the specific archetypes of weapons, like sidearms overall are really powerful, but what if a rapid fire sidearm with bad stats is the only one that's allowed in this playlist? Well then, sidearm's not that much of a problem in this specific sandbox. So this brings the question. This is why I wanted your head rolling with ideas here and really trying to think about what I'm talking about here, because I want you to focus on these questions when you give feedback to Bungie in future times. So, should Destiny experiment with alternate formats? That would be something like economy-based countdown, like Counter-Strike. Maybe a ban list in competitive. Maybe a party mode, like you're always amplified. You have max airborne effectiveness, and you only use snipers. Maybe a power limit rumble with King of the Hill, where you're not allowed to queue unless you're below the power limit. Maybe an infection mode, where a lot of zombies start with Trinity Ghoul, and survivors have Risk Runner or something like that. Like, you get the idea. Maybe a double primary, no exotic Rift playlist. Maybe combined arms with Capture the Flag. Also, Where are the custom game options in private match? At the very least, and this is something I really wanted to get to and talk about for a long time, seems like the only appropriate place to put it rather than make its own video, Bungie should make sure that new players have access to all the old gear. So what is the difference here between this Aniop D and this Onyo D? I'm not making a D's nuts joke. 87 range, 17 zoom versus 84 and 15. Aniop also has access to snapshot, which kind of offsets this handling. Most people use it with peacekeepers anyway, so it's kind of a dead stat and not comparable. In almost every feasible way, Aniop is better than Onyo, and yet a new player cannot get Aniop. So if they're getting ran in a game, in a lobby, by Aniop, they can't compete. They literally cannot get it. They would have to break TOS and buy an account or something like that to have anything close. And this is hoping that someone has an Aniop like this one. Spoiler alert, I do. I rarely use this gun too, because I know how much of an advantage it is over my opponent. Also, kill clip versus multi-kill clip, they are built different, not the same thing. And the origin trait doesn't matter when the Aniop is so significantly better in every other category. Also, ricochet rounds. So here are some potential solutions to new player gear accessibility. So maybe a FOMO engram series in the helm that has all the old stuff. It might contain the Aniop. Maybe a menagerie style activity. We got a pirate one of those, like a pirate menagerie this time. But maybe cycle it in so you can choose your loot based on older things and have hundreds of loot to choose between, not just maybe 10 items and most of them craftable. They could have a huge retro catalog in the tower kiosk. They could allow weapon crafting for stuff like the Aniop, but it's at sunset light level, so you can't bring it into trials. Maybe a temporary vendor that lends weapons to fit an alternate format playlist. Maybe heavy nerfs to old items. Or, I don't know, just continue power creep. And, like, think about it. If they release another Onyo D, but with better stats, better perks, then there's no need to get an Aniop, because Onyo would be better at that point. And this doesn't even begin to address the different generations of the same weapon, like Eye of Soul with the Celerity perk, which boosts its handling. So you can have an Eye of Soul with Snapshot and Celerity, which essentially brings it to close to 100 handling with Snapshot, whereas the current version has Snapshot and Surplus. One of those perks requires you to have 3 abilities to have a similar power level. The other one requires nothing and is literally just better. And if you're the last person standing, you get really juiced, way more juice than the Alacrity origin trait. So the old Eye of Soul is so much better than the new. I don't know how Bungie addresses this, unless the Fourth Guardian. It's a character slot isolated from all other characters that allows access into alternate formats. And this would include temporary loadouts. Essentially, this fourth character is not tied to your other 3 whatsoever. So it doesn't matter if your other characters have like thousands of legendary shards. The Fourth Guardian has infinite, and anything you get on the Fourth Guardian does not apply to the other 3. You can't buy an Aniop on the Fourth Guardian and then trade that to your Hunter. It's not going to work like that. You log into the Fourth Guardian, and then you're able to queue party game modes like Trinity Ghoul Infection. And it automatically throws Trinity Ghoul in your inventory or something like that. Makes you equip it, not able to queue unless you have it equipped type thing. Anyway, that's all I got so far. If you like this PowerPoint style video and these ramblings, definitely check out my other video on crafting, where I also do a similar comparison to other games, get you thinking, so that way when we provide feedback to Bungie, we can do our best job at really dialing in what we're disappointed in or what we like, what we dislike. See y'all in the next one. Thanks again, everybody.